Hey, welcome back to the Dating While Adulting podcast. I am your host, Michael Thomas. And because I have to go through this every now and then, let me go through it now. You can find this podcast everywhere you find podcasts. Go to datingwhileadulting.com for links to everything that you need to know, show notes, blog posts, how to find this, how to find that. If you want to see, if you don't want to go to YouTube, you can see the YouTube feed at datingwhileadulting.com. Leave your comments, send us emails at podcast at datingwhileadulting.com. I do this every now and then, but hey, it is what it is. Go check us out. And of course, remember your part in all of this. Tell 50 friends to tell 50 friends. I am your host, Michael Thomas. And before I move on, let me just go back for a second. Uh, it's funny because I listened back to the last episode on sex addiction and porn addiction. And the funny thing about it to me was, well, it wasn't funny. It was just kind of like bad, actually. Was when I listened to it, it sounded like I was whispering. It sounded like I was like in a room and there were other people throughout the house that I didn't want to hear what I was saying. So I was like whispering. But so it's weird. But I was actually using a different kind of recording software. And as a result, it really didn't do the job that I wanted it to. It made it seem like I was whispering and stuff like that. And I didn't feel like re-recording it, honestly, because I just didn't feel like it. So that's out there. So I apologize in advance for anybody who hasn't heard it yet that might have to raise the volume a little bit louder than it would normally do so. But now, as you can hear, and if you're on YouTube, as you can see, that things are back to normal and we're back to, your regularly scheduled pod. Yeah. So that's just the housekeeping thing. And now, probably way too much than you even cared to hear. But let me get to what I want to talk about today. You know, there seems to be a movement, and I'm sure that most, if not all of you all, have heard of it. But if you haven't, let me enlighten you because I was enlightened on a couple of things. First of all, there's this thing with Will Smith, and he started this, what is being now referred to as a Big Willie challenge, or some people are calling it a dad bod challenge, where he posted on Instagram. And you have to forgive me for not knowing the details necessarily because I don't follow Will Smith like that on Instagram. So all of this is kind of secondhand to me. But I saw a picture of him that he posted where he was showing off his body and he was talking about how he was in the worst shape that he'd ever been in. And he talked about how he was committing to getting back into shape, getting back to his playing weight, as some of us guys like to refer to it as. And this kind of started a little bit of a wave because there have been other people who have jumped in and joined in on that movement, like Anthony Anderson, Flex. Where has Flex been? It's like it's just so weird that I have not heard from Flex or hadn't heard anything about Flex and I don't know how long. And this is the first time that I'm hearing about him in years. He's just popping up like, wow, okay, that's what he's doing now. No, I don't want to disrespect Flex because I don't watch a lot of TV like that. And considering he's a comedian, I don't watch sitcoms like that. So he might be on five shows or something like that. And I'm just not hip to it. It was just funny that of all of these people that I was seeing that was joining this movement or this wave or whatever you want to call it, that he was one of them. That was just a weird name for me to hear. But shout out to Flex. Hey, and if you are on five TV shows, hey, more power to you. uh, and also, man, I have to give Flex credit because Flex has been married to Shanice for like 137 years. And from all accounts, things seem to be working. Now, the cynical, single, dating while adulting side of me will say, well, yeah, just because they're together, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're happy. But the positive, optimistic side of me wants to say, well, hey, let me just celebrate Black love as long as it lasts. And there's no need for me to project my positivity or, well, my negativity onto their relationship. And I am rooting for them, uh, especially where it seems like every day there's a new divorce. Like, Bill Gates, these billionaires. I tell you what, hey, if you're a billionaire, hey, shoot, I guess you might be questioning why you got married in the first place. Especially since, and I know I'm going off on a tangent here, but especially since Bill Gates has always been seen as the nerd of all nerds. And to think from what I read that part of the reason that they're getting divorced after all of these years was because Bill was getting it in. He was knocking down some of the Microsoft employees. Oh, shoot. Bill Gates, I just wouldn't have thought that. But getting back to what I was talking about, though, uh, yeah, Anthony Anderson. Hold up, Anthony Anderson too. Another thing about a thing about Anthony Anderson is I I know that he lost like a whole bunch of weight, and I wasn't aware that he had gained his weight back. Now, mind you, I don't follow Anthony Anderson that closely to really know what his ups and downs on the scales have been. And I don't watch Blackish, and it's nothing against the show. It's just that I don't really do sitcoms like that. But when I saw the picture of him without his shirt on, and I guess all of these people who've join into this thing with Will Smith, they are all posing on their social media accounts shirtless. And when I saw Anthony Anderson, I was just like, that looks like Anthony Anderson, the same one who had lost a bunch of weight. But maybe he wants to get toned up. I don't know. Don't really care, to be honest. It's funny how people like will talk for like 5 minutes about something and then end by saying that they don't really care. Well, if you didn't really care, why did you talk about it for 5 minutes? But I guess I do care more about Anthony Anderson than I ever wanted to think about or admit. But so Anthony Anderson, Flex, I saw Dr. Dre, I saw Marlon Wayans, I saw Chris Spencer, and it's funny how Chris Spencer just always pops up in things. Like he's a behind the scenes guy for people that don't know. He's a comedian and a comedic writer for shows and things like that. That's how he's made his name. And for a minute, he used to have a talk show back in the day. I'm surprised that I remember that. But again, I guess that gets into me caring more about things than I want to admit to. So, anyway, all of those people have joined this thing and they've all posted these pictures on their social media accounts, shirtless, I guess, to serve as their before. And I guess when they all get to where they want to go in terms of how they look and they're working out and all that stuff, then they'll post after pics or something like that. So, hey, I'm all for it. Obviously, I applaud this. And part of the reason is because, this podcast, like I've said before, it caters to a more quote unquote mature demographic. So it's not the 20-year olds or 30-year olds that normally listen. It's like people who in their 40s and 50s who are in that midlife area and they're trying to figure some stuff out. So if somebody in that age range, and all of these cats are in their 40s, I think they're all in their 50s to be honest. But so if somebody is all about getting into better shape and working on their quality of life, I'm all for that. I mean, me and Reggie had the whole health episode, and it's funny I keep referring to that. I think I referred to it in the last episode, but I think it's all the more important considering where we are, the demographic of this podcast at this stage of our lives. So nothing wrong with that, and that's not really what I wanted to talk about. That's not really the point of this episode today. That is just a setup, a lead up to what I really want to talk about, because as I was reading about this big Willie challenge, this dad bod challenge about these brothers who are trying to get it together, I came across an article written by a woman that talked about how Will Smith doing what he's doing and these fellows who are joining him in doing what they're doing, it highlighted the difference in body image in males and females. And that's really what I want to talk about more so than anything else. Those brothers doing what they do, that's on them. But this whole thing about, you know, women feel a certain way about how men are viewed versus how they are viewed, And I read the article and I really didn't get where she was coming from. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to link to the article in the show notes for anybody that wants to, so they can read it for themselves. And this isn't like when Reggie says he's going to link to an article or something like that. It never does. I'm actually going to put this up because I want people to read it. And shout out to her for writing it. I'm referring to it. So there's something to it. So I'm not bashing her. I would never link to something that I'm bashing. But I do think it's interesting for a conversation, especially again, considering where we all are in our lives right now. But what struck me about the article is that you see a group of older guys who are dedicating themselves to trying to achieve a better quality of life. And that's ultimately what it comes down to. And instead of applauding these guys, instead of letting it inspire her to get into shape or encourage other women to get into shape, instead she chose to take this like woe is me approach. And I just didn't see these brothers committing themselves to getting in better shape as a platform for someone to feel like, woe is me, it's so hard to be a woman. It kind of speaks to more of a mindset. And I just found that interesting. And another reason that I found it interesting, well, one reason was because of what I just said. It kind of spoke to like a woe is me attitude. But another reason is it kind of spoke to how resistant people are to change. And in this case, because she was writing from a woman's perspective, I'm going to speak about women. And now this isn't on some like women versus men and I'm attacking women or anything like that. It speaks to how people are resistant to change. And I think too many people are resistant to changing the bad things about their lives. And instead, we live in a society and in this culture where we need to start embracing things, even if they are bad for us, even in this case, if they will kill us sooner, even if we might live longer, but we won't be as comfortable living. So I just find it interesting that it's all about from these brothers like having a positive spin and wanting to do something to improve their quality of life. What it comes down to for her is, it's hard for being a woman, and we should learn to be more accepting of who we are and what we are, even at the expense of our health. And, you know, I guess in this whole body image, body shaming, body positivity, love our curves, and all of that stuff, I guess it's just a way to justify your existence, really. It's like Lizzo, for example. It's like you can argue body positivity all day, but at what price? It's like at the expense of your health. And I remember I was listening to the radio once, and it was a morning show. It was actually the Burt Show. I think it's a nationally syndicated show. At least it's a regionally syndicated show. I want to give them credit since I'm using them as a source. And they have their DJs is divided between like a couple guys, a couple women. And Lizzo came up, and the guys were saying, "Well, that's not really. She's not really healthy." And the women just got so upset and offended by the guys saying that she wasn't healthy. They weren't attacking her for being big or anything like that. It was a health conversation. And the women just got super defensive and talking about how you don't know that she's on stage for 2 hours a night. She moves around. That's good cardio. And how dare you speak about her as being unhealthy? You don't know that woman and all of that. And while the part about not knowing her is true and not knowing what she does, that's true. But I think all of us, men, women, whatever you want to say, if you look at Lizzo and just look at her, you don't know anything about her. I think if you ask people, you take a poll and say, yo, do you look at this woman and see a picture of health or not? Or if you're just neutral, maybe she's healthy, maybe not. I would venture to say that most people would say that no, she is not at her healthiest. Definitely not at her healthiest, but not even healthy. And the health component, again, since we are all of a certain age, is really important more so than just the aesthetics of how a person looks. Because especially at a time when heart disease, as in heart disease amongst women, as a matter of fact, is at an all-time high. I don't have the statistics in front of me, but heart disease amongst women, especially Black women, is creeping up to one of the top killers of women. And it's not something that's just like, well, just hereditary or something like that. There might be hereditary components to it, but no, ultimately what it comes down to is the way a lot of us are taking care of ourselves and or not taking care of ourselves. So while im- I'm all for not beating yourself up. But with that said, we also have to be realistic, and we also have to be realistic and just say, yo, this might be bad. And it's cool if I adopt a mindset of wanting to change this thing that won't benefit me in the long run. So, you know, and that's the whole thing about these brothers. It's like the whole dad bod thing and wanting to change it. It's a mindset thing. It's not just about looking different or getting a six pack or something like that. When you gain weight and you get older, that just hits different. You can't do the things that you wanted to do when you were younger. And while some people might dismiss that stuff as just, well, I'm just getting older and this is just a natural effect of what happens with your body or whatever, it's like, no, it's like a lot of that is is stuff that you can change. You won't feel like you did when you were 20, but yet and still, you don't have to accept that, well, shoot, my knees hurt, my back hurt. I walk up a flight of steps and I get winded and stuff like that. Ooh, this weight is just something that I just have to deal with, this blood pressure and all of that. No, all of these things can be controlled. And so that's part of what it comes down to for these brothers who have entered into this challenge. It's like they they look a certain way, but what Will Smith said was that he's in the worst shape of his life, and not just the physical shape, but shoot, just the way that he's feeling, at least from what I read. And I don't really know how his saying that and speaking openly about that would lead anyone to want to write an article or anything like that that speaks poorly about what he's doing or speaks poorly about how women view themselves. Because while somebody might say society, really what it comes down to in a lot of these cases is women judging other women. And I think a lot of it is, a lot of the reason that a lot of guys don't have those issues is because when men judge other men, we really don't care as much. We don't embrace those things as much. So that's the whole thing. And maybe another part about the whole thing about these brothers doing this is that, there might be a component where they might actually want to impress their spouses. They might want to look good for their wives. Nah, that's probably not true. That's probably not true. And the reason for that is because it doesn't seem like people do anything for their spouses, really. It's like they'll do it for themselves. It's like weird. It's like this thing where people, when they get married, they feel like because you said that you'll accept them through sickness and health, that means that, yeah, you can just let go. I don't meet too many people, male or female, that say, I am doing this because I want to be the best representation of myself for my spouse, for my husband, for my wife. It's like, yeah, I don't ever hear that. It's like, even in talking about losing weight and talking about people getting in shape and stuff like that, I don't think I've ever heard anybody say, yeah, I want to look good for my wife or I'm doing this for my husband. It's like there could be like 100 different reasons, but yeah, not for that reason. So just forget I ever said that. And in Dr. Dre's case, I guess he wouldn't be looking to impress his wife anyway. considering considering what him and his wife are going through. So hey, yeah, and yeah, so it's just interesting how men are kind of conditioned that if there's something wrong, in this case with their bodies, they need to change that. Where women are encouraged not to change, but to embrace their bodies. And I just find that interesting. And that was the whole point about that article that was just fascinating to me, just the different mindsets that people have. And like I said earlier, you'll embrace your body and embrace these things that you're resistant to change, even if it's harming you. Yeah. So, and I don't want to sound insensitive. I don't want to come across as somebody who's just like bashing or anything like that. Cause I understand eating disorders and I understand, and honestly, I don't understand eating disorders orders. And that's why the onus is on me to be a lot more sympathetic about it because I don't understand it, but I do understand and I am aware that that is a thing that a lot of people suffer from, and I am aware of the impact that that has had on women growing up as children, things like that. But I think there can be a balance. I think you can acknowledge that there is a need to take better care of yourself without starving yourself. It doesn't have to be 0 or 100. It can be at 60, 70, or whatever. And that's more what I'm speaking about, especially like I referred to earlier, the demographic of this podcast. This is a more mature generation. We're not teenagers anymore. So I don't really know, and it speaks to my ignorance about eating disorders amongst people in their 40s and 50s. But in this age of self love, self care, therapy, things like that, as older people, we have access to things to help us through that if we still deal with that, as opposed to when we were teenagers and didn't know what to do. Some people cut themselves or stuck their fingers down their throat or whatever it is. So I'm not saying that you can't use that as an excuse anymore, but I do think it's something that you need to be honest with. Yeah, so that's that. And let me just say, because I was down this rabbit hole and I was reading another article. And let me ask this question to people out there. And while you're riding in your car, sitting in your crib, or wherever you are listening to this or watching this on YouTube, does anybody know what a VBO is? And there's no shame if you don't know, because I didn't know and I'm still confused about it. But to enlighten those of you that don't, a VBO, well, VBO, it's an acronym for visible belly outline. Now, I don't know if this is a new thing that was made up or if this is a thing that has been in existence for a long time. I have no clue. But when I read it, I honestly laughed out loud because it was just funny to me. So, this visible belly outline, and the purpose of this article, and I'll link to that, but I don't think that article was as meaningful as the one that I referenced earlier. But the article was about how women should learn to embrace their visible belly outline, or their VBO. And I guess the concept is that when, if you have a little bit of a gut and you wear a tight dress or something like that, I guess the outline of your lower belly shows. And to some, I guess they'll find that to be unattractive. So that was just funny to me. Now, I appreciated this article because if you have VBO, I am all for your embracing it, or letting it all hide, letting it all hang out, because I would prefer that you not hide that. I would prefer to know exactly what I'm getting, as opposed to if I got you home and got you undressed and saw this belly hanging over your panties, and I'm like, oh shoot, I didn't anticipate that. Now, with that said, honestly, if we're in that position and and I see it, I seriously doubt that it would deter me from hitting if we're at that point. But that's a whole nother story. Anyway, yeah, let that thing hang out. And I know that should that might hurt the Spanx stock. But speaking of Spanx, it's like, shoot, the ability to hide the VBO is what made Sarah Blakely. Sarah Blakely is the person that started Spanx, is what made her a billionaire. So yeah, so let's take some money out of Sarah's pocket and let that thing fly. If you had that gut, let hey, rock that gut. Now, ideally, because I'm back on my health kick. Well, I've always been on my health kick, but I'm back on my health talk. I'm talking that talk. Ideally, you should be working to lose that belly. And the reason I say that is because it is known that belly fat and fat that's stored around your midsection area, that is one of the biggest indicators that you have underlying health problems. So while I'm making a joke about it, partially because it's funny, yeah, it yeah, the bigger thing is that, yeah, you shouldn't just accept that and embrace that, which goes back to the point I was making earlier. You should be looking to work that off because, again, we're talking about health, long-term health, health in for people at this age range, health for mature people. Because I tell you what, man, at this age range, there are things that are more important than just being thick. The older that we get, thick can equate to being unhealthy. So while it sounds good, and I know we want to love ourselves and all that stuff, we need to love ourselves while accepting that we want to live longer. And, so it's cool. And for me personally, I don't, when I meet my soulmate, and I'm going to meet my soulmate, I want us to be on the same page. I want us to both be trying to preserve our quality of life. I don't want to be, working out, trying to eat healthy while my soulmate is trying to counteract my efforts by eating whatever, drinking whatever, and all of that stuff. And it's funny that I talk about that because in one of the earlier podcasts, I had talked about how online, how there's so many more women that I meet that list eating as a hobby. And yeah, I'm imagining that that hobby isn't healthy eating. So, yeah, so that's pretty much the gist of it. So, yeah, I'm sorry if it sounded like I was on the soapbox, but I am about to get off of it. And I'll just say, in closing, when it comes to these brothers and what they're doing in trying to get into better shape, I think everybody, we have three choices. One, we can applaud what they're doing and encourage them. Two, we can let it inspire us to get into better shape ourselves, or we can just shut up and just not say anything. I just disagree with the woman in that article, and her approach was when she heard about what they were doing was to come back with a woe is me article about how it's so hard for women and stuff like that. It, there are enough women that can encourage each other to do what needs to be done. And I think would be real cool for a group of women to get together and have a mom bod challenge. Why not? I mean, I think that's more productive for long-term health, long-term quality of life than just saying, I'm just going to love me for me. Because the whole thing in this day and age of doing something to elicit some kind of pity or talk about how society views women versus men, especially considering there really isn't a firm definition as to what society is, who makes up society. Is it like Twitter? Is it like podcasters? Is it like men? Is it other women? It's like it really does sound like when someone talks about society, it speaks to self esteem in either a lower value on self esteem or the lack of self esteem that you would let people, particularly people that you don't know, influence how you feel about yourself. So I think that's the biggest takeaway from all of this. At this age, quality of life is the most important thing. And, you know, yeah, I'll just speak for myself. I want to be able to walk up steps without getting winded. I want to be able to do things that I can, when 20 years from now, that I can still do now. And if I can't, I think the wrong approach is to come out and say, well, I'm just getting older, or well, this is just what happens to you, or oh well, society says that this or that. No, I am going to take control of my own life, and I am going to do what I need to do to preserve my quality of life. So I'll end by saying this, and I know I said in closing, but I'll say one more thing. When it comes to embracing who you are and all that mess, you embrace things that you can't change. Like for example, if a man is 4'8", you know, he's not going to grow to be 6 feet. It just won't happen. So being that he can, so being that he can't get taller, and all he can be is 4'8", he has to be the best version of a 4'8" man that he can, because there is nothing that he can do about that. That is just the way society, that's just the way that life is. I almost say the way society is. Like that has anything to do with society. But that's the way life is. And he just has to deal with that. So you embrace the things that you can't change and just try to be the best version of that. Now, you don't embrace things that you just refuse to change that will lead to an early death, regardless of what society says. It's like, no, you don't embrace things. If there's a better path, you don't embrace that and talk about self-love and all of that. No, you love yourself while you're actively working to change it. And that's the problem that I see with too many women that I meet, unfortunately, too many women that I read about, too many women that I know. And saying too many is not saying all. Too many just means more than should be, is that they're more on this self-love kick, and that self-love is killing them. So that's it for me. I'm off my soapbox officially. Vote for Pedro. For anyone who has seen Napoleon Dynamite, I love that movie. And while I don't watch Blackish, I will watch Napoleon Dynamite, and have watched it 100 times. Thank you all for coming by. Thank you all for listening. Hopefully, you all will keep coming back and keep listening. I am Michael, and I will say goodbye for all of us here at the podcast. So, goodbye.